Hello and welcome to This Date in History, aka TDH. This show is all about the events that occurred today in years past, both recognized by actual historians, but mainly things I personally find intriguing enough for me to bring to you. The source of this information comes from the smart device application Today in History on this day. For links to the app, music, and anything else potentially interesting, check the box below. Anyway, on with the show! Today is Wednesday, aka Wednesday, December 1st, 2021. In 100, Day of the Nerds was celebrated, making the first Nerds Day. I couldn't find anything about this, but we nerds have been around almost as long as Christ. 700 years later, in 800, within the Vatican, corruption accusations against Pope Leo III were judged by Charlemagne. Ultimately, Leo was relieved of the rumors and later crowned Charlemagne as Holy Roman Emperor. Doubling the year and adding 40, in 1640, João IV of Portugal was acclaimed as king, bringing an end to the 59 years of Iberian union of the crowns of Portugal and Spain, and also ending the rule of the Philippine dynasty. In 1821, the Dominican Republic won independence thanks to José Núñez de Cáceres, who also named the new territory the Republic of Spanish Haiti. 41 years later, in 1862, as he had stated 10 weeks prior, President Abraham Lincoln reaffirmed portions of the Emancipation Proclamation regarding the necessity of ending slavery during his State of the Union address. Moving on up the next century, in 1913, Greece annexed Crete, which had recently tasted freedom via self-rule from Turkey after the First Balkan War. Also in 1913, the first underground railway system in the Southern Hemisphere and in Latin America, the Buenos Aires Metro, began operation. 5 years later, in 1918, despite remaining part of the Danish kingdom, Iceland became a sovereign state. Also in 1918, the Great Union concluded when Transylvania united with Romania, the incorporation of Bessarabia and Bukovina already having happened on March 27th and November 28th respectively. Also in 1918, later to be known as the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes was proclaimed. 6 years after that, in 1924, the Boston Bruins, the National Hockey League's first United States-based franchise, played their first game in league play at home at the Boston Arena indoor hockey facility, which still exists today. 10 years later, in 1934, within the USSR, Sergei Kirov, a Politburo member, was assassinated. Using this incident, Stalin developed a pretext to initiate the Great Purge. In 1941, Mayor of New York City and Director of the Office of Civilian Defense, Fiorello LaGuardia, created the Civil War Patrol with the signing of Administrative Order 9 during World War II. Also in 1941 and also during World War II, Emperor Hirohito of Japan gave the final approval to initiate war against the United States. 14 years later, in 1955, seamstress Rosa Parks in Montgomery, Alabama, refused to give her seat to a white man, resulting in her arrest for violating the city's racial segregation laws. This kicked the American Civil Rights Movement into high gear and resulted in a bus boycott. 4 years later, in 1959, the Antarctic Treaty, setting aside the continent as a scientific preserve and also banning military activity, saw its opening date for signatures while the Cold War raged. 10 years later, in 1969, having not occurred since World War II, the first draft lottery in the United States was held to bolster forces during the Vietnam conflict. In 1973, Papua New Guinea gained self-governance from Australia. In 1984, an airliner was deliberately crashed in order to test technologies and gather data to help improve survivability of crashes when NASA conducted the Controlled Impact Demonstration. 4 years later, in 1988, the UN member states globally proclaimed World AIDS Day. 2 years later, in 1990, Channel Tunnel, also known as the Channel, sections started from the United Kingdom and France met beneath the seabed. 365 days after that, in 1991, seeking independence from the Soviet Union during the Cold War, Ukrainian voters overwhelmingly approved a referendum. Post Y2K in the year 2000, marking the first peaceful transfer of executive federal power to an opposing political party, following a free and democratic election in Mexico's history, Vicente Fox Quesada was inaugurated as the President of Mexico. And in 2018 in Oulu, Finland, the police informed the public about the first offense of the much larger child sexual exploitation operation. Verse, Mary Tussaud, 1761, Minoru Yamasaki, 1912, Pablo Escobar, 1949. And that concludes the show. Once again, check the underbar for any links you may be interested in. For your dose of past events daily, I am Ayo Xander, and you are you. Toodles!